happy to be with you today. Thank you very much. And it's great to be back in Iowa. You know, less than 2 months from today, here in this very state, you're going to begin the process of choosing the next president of the United States. And after 7 years of Barack Obama, it's helpful to remind ourselves exactly what that means. The president's job is not to micromanage the private economy. It's not to make healthcare decisions. And it's not to try and change the weather. The first job of our president, as stated in the Constitution, is actually the last thing President Obama seems interested in, and that is serving as our Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the United States. So in just 2 months, we will be choosing the person who will be in charge of the world's greatest military, the person responsible for protecting the safety of your children and mine. And with that honor comes another extraordinary duty, that of representing those who put their lives on the line for freedom. Now, as a state that sees its fair share of politicians, you know it's in vogue to pay lip service to our veterans and troops. But you also know that talk is cheap, and that candidates must be judged not just on what they say, but on what they do and have done. So today I'll tell you exactly what I've done for our servicemen and women over the last few years, and exactly what I will do to uphold my duty to them as president. I believe our Commander-in-Chief's duty to our men and women in uniform comes in 2 parts. The first is to honor our troops while they are serving, and the second is to honor them after they come home. Honoring them while they are serving begins with reducing the likelihood that they will ever be pulled into conflict. And the way to do that is to not ignore threats. The way to do that is to project American strength abroad, to stand beside allies such as Israel, stand up to enemies such as Iran, and engage strategically around the world. Throughout our history, presidents in both parties have understood that strength is a means of preventing war, not promoting it. To restore strength, I will reverse the defense cuts that politicians in Washington, including some Republicans now running for president, have fought to keep and to even deepen. The military will no longer be used as a pawn in budget negotiations when I'm president. While I agree with those who argue that the Department of Defense, like every agency, must eliminate financial waste, I also understand that defense is the reason we have a federal government in the first place. Our nation cannot function without security. This is why every time we try to cut $1 from defense, it seems to cost us several more just to make up for it. I will return strength to our military as the first means of honoring our troops. But there may be times when that is not enough to deter conflict, when evil marches forward and tests us anyway. It is in these times that the President of the United States is faced with his or her most difficult decision. Choosing whether or not to send troops into combat is one of the greatest burdens of any office in the world. It also impacts not just the mothers and fathers and daughters and sons who go into conflict, but also the family and friends who spend so many sleepless nights praying for their safety. If you've ever seen these videos of where one of our members of the armed forces surprises their family by coming home early, then you know how emotional those reunions can be. They're emotional just to watch, because we are all inherently understand the burden and the sacrifice that the families of our armed forces carry. And we understand that that sacrifice should never be called on lightly. If I must make this difficult decision as Commander-in-Chief, I will recognize that I also have a duty to be the communicator-in-chief. And I will speak directly and honestly to the American people about exactly why our national security interests are at stake, and exactly why military engagement is the best or only option to address the problem before us. And I will also make this pledge here and now. I will never send our men and women in uniform into a fair fight. By that I mean I will always equip them with the resources and the strategies to keep the upper hand. Any candidate proposing that we keep the defense cuts imposed under sequestration cannot make that plain promise. Finally, our troops will also be backed by something else they've been missing under our current president, and that is a full commitment to victory. Our military will never again doubt their commander-in-chief's support for their mission, nor will they question America's commitment to winning. Those principles will guide my duty to our active service members. But what about the second part of our duty? To those who serve. It's been too long since Washington has properly cared for those who have cared for us, and we will change that if, God willing, I am elected president. Before I explain how, I want to pause for a moment and introduce to you who has traveled all the way from Florida to be with us today. And that's my brother, Mario Rubio. He looks like my dad, but he's my brother. See, Mario joined the Army in July of 1968, the month after he graduated high school. And he served in the Army's 7th Special Forces Group, the Green Berets, until April of 1971, which happens to be the month before I was born. In fact, one of the first things he did when he returned from duty was to drive my mother to the hospital to have me. Yes, he's that much older than me. All throughout my childhood, I looked up to Mario. He had been a football star in high school, which was already enough to make him a legend in our home. But most importantly, I remember it being a tremendous source of pride for my family, especially for my parents and my grandparents, my grandfather, that he had risked his life for the country that he had given us so much. But today, like too many veterans across this country, my brother Mario is struggling to get the care owed to him for an injury he suffered during his service. He was hit in the mouth while in jump school, bending his front teeth back in a way that became an orthodontic nightmare. He was driven to the dentist at Fort Benning, where they did some initial work to correct the damage, but the Army never made an official record of the visit. So today he needs more orthodontic work as a result of his injury, but the VA won't cover it. They asked him to prove that the injury was a result of military service, and he said, well, the only time I ever jumped out of a plane was in the military. He's had to file a claim and wait for a hearing, which could take anywhere from 18 months to 3 years. Meanwhile, he's stuck waiting for the procedure that he needs. Veteran in this situation had to go through. And like so many of them, he will tell you how confusing it has been, how even the forms he has to fill out seem almost intentionally complicated. He's often met with the same charm and the same efficiency at the VA that the rest of us are finding at the DMV. My brother, like all veterans, deserves better. And when I'm president, they will have better. Here's what the media doesn't want you to know. One of the reasons the VA is so incompetent is that union bosses have rigged the system, making it almost impossible to fire VA employees, no matter how bad they are. That's why I have worked in the wake of the VA scandal to change the law to allow the VA secretary to fire any corrupt or negligent bureaucrat. It wasn't easy. I had to take on, for example, Bernie Sanders, who actually tried to block my bill. I took on the unions. I took on every one of them to put the interests of veterans above the interests of bureaucrats. And we succeeded. But even with this success, little has changed. Few have been fired, and corruption still runs rampant. For example, 2 VA officials were recently found to have defrauded the department of $400,000. But they weren't fired, they were merely demoted. And even that demotion didn't last. Just last week, the VA rescinded the demotions. The examples like this are numerous, and all the while our veterans languish. I recently read a story about a mother of one wounded Army veteran in desperate need of care. President Obama had written to her in 2009, promising to do all he could to pay for her son's care. And as she put it, something good might as well come out of that. It is doing no good lying in my drawer. She was referring to a letter he had written her, which she decided to sell. It is for reasons like this that I am taking action again. I have filed a second bill that goes even further, allowing us to fire more than just the managers, but also the lower-level employees who are neglecting their duties. And yet the truth is, we will never be able to completely overhaul the system until we have a new commander-in-chief. Hillary Clinton wants to be that commander-in-chief, but she refuses to even admit that there's a crisis, saying that problems at the VA aren't, as, and I quote this, widespread, as has been reported. On this issue, like virtually every other, Hillary Clinton would keep the status quo the status quo. I, on the other hand, will not just reform Washington. I intend to transform it. My principles for transforming the VA are simple. The first is accountability. Accountability is the radical concept I just discussed, so radical that no one in Washington seems to have any clue what it is. And that is why any corrupt and negligent workers at the VA should be fired. Now, let me be clear, there are a lot of good people at the VA. Many are veterans themselves. And the other side of accountability is that if you are doing a good job, you should be recognized and valued for your hard work. But those who are not doing a good job will be fired when I'm president. My next principle is transparency. We need transparency in order for accountability to work. One reason we're not seeing the results we wanted out of the first effort at reforming the VA is that we simply have no way of verifying what is happening. I'd love to be able to give you a specific number of people who have been fired as a result of our law, but no one knows what that number is. The VA is claiming that it's in the hundreds, but the fact checkers have laughed that off. They estimate that it's in the 20s. Others say it's in the single digits, but no one knows. And this is how bureaucrats at the VA get away with it all. When I'm president, we will know what's happening. I will require the VA and the VHA to report publicly on all aspects of its operations, including quality, safety, patient experience, timeliness, and cost effectiveness. And with that information, we will be empowered to make decisions and make lasting changes to the system. My third and final principle for transforming the VA is choice. When I'm president, benefits are going to follow the veteran. The veteran is not going to have to follow the benefits. That means that if your local VA doesn't provide efficient and high-quality care, but the hospital around the corner does, you will be able to take your VA benefits and go to that hospital. Veterans facing health problems of all kinds, including mental health issues, need to have the option to seek care from private providers in a way that also preserves traditional VA services. This, by the way, is important to my brother Mario, because he needs periodontal work done, but there isn't a periodontist within the VHA anywhere near him. To get the care he needs, he will have to go to a private provider. These three principles I've discussed, accountability, transparency, and choice, have the power to truly transform this and any system for that matter. I've given you the what and the how of our president's duty to our men and women in uniform, but I want to close by giving you the why. Because I believe the why of America's military might, more than anything else, is what has been missing for the past 7 years. Let me start with this personal note. When Mario and I were kids, even though we grew up years apart, we were greatly influenced by our grandfather. He lived with my family for most of our childhoods. Mario actually shared a room with him for a time. And years later, I would sit with my grandfather for hours on our porch, sometimes discussing whatever fascinations occupied my attention at the time. But most of all, I would listen. I would listen to his stories of growing up in Cuba, stories of the pain of losing his country. And I would listen to him speak about the leaders and ideas that had inspired him. He revered Harry Truman and Ronald Reagan, detested communism, and believed with all his heart that the United States was destined to be the defender of human progress throughout the world. Our lessons took place against the backdrop of the Cold War. It is sometimes easy to forget today how tense those times were for America. The nuclear drills in the schools in the 60s, the worried reports on the evening news, the frenzied debates about communism that dominated campaigns. In some ways, what we're going through today is similar, not just with a resurgent Russia and other traditional powers, but also with our civilizational struggle against radical Islam. Like the Cold War, this is a clash of ideologies, a clash we have to win. To win against Soviet-style communism, presidents from Truman to Kennedy to Reagan knew we needed to couple America's military might with an equally mighty defense of her values, not just as right for America, but as right for the world. President Truman once said, and I'll quote this, "God has created us and brought us to our present position of power and strength for some great purpose. It is given to us to defend the spiritual values, the moral code, against the vast forces of evil that seek to destroy them." End quote. Reagan understood this concept too. In fact, better than most. He inspired a belief in it, in both our citizens, but also in our military. And because of him, the Cold War was won. But today, in this time of mounting turmoil, our current president seems to believe something else, something different. He believes America has been a bully for too many years, that we should be more accepting of other values, even when they violate the God-given rights this nation was founded on. We see this in his dealings with Cuba and Iran, and in his indifference to Israel. We see it in the way he lectures Christians not to get on their high horse in condemning radical Islam. There is no doubt in my mind that his weakness, both moral and strategic, has led to the discord we see around the world today. This, in turn, has endangered our people as well as the men and women in uniform who are called to defend them. As president, my cause will be peace, and I will understand that the only means of achieving it are strength of arms, but also strength of values. This is the powerful lesson of history. My grandfather's lessons all those years ago were true, and he inspired in both my brother and me a desire to serve this extraordinary country, the country that gave us all the chance in life that he never had himself. Mario served in the noblest ways of all. I strive to serve too, though I will never completely repay the debt I owe to America. But I pledge this: as president, in all that I do, I will honor the 2 centuries of veterans who have defended this exceptional nation and the values it represents. And I will honor the brave men and women in uniform who carry on that legacy today. I will honor them by defending their dignity in Washington, by proudly advancing the values many have died to defend, by uniting our people around the common cause of liberty, and by promoting the security of our nation, a security that needs to thrive in our time and for all time. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Senator. And Mario, thank you very much for being here this morning. We really appreciate having you. It's an honor. All right, while we get set up, I am a high water consumer as well, just so you know. Apparently this is a big story to Politico and others. Can you comment on what you're going to do to overcome that huge weakness?
I'm going to have some more water.
Well, I said to the crowd, and I'll say it in person as well, we really appreciate the depth of knowledge and seriousness with which you've approached the VA issue. Obviously a personal issue, but also an incredibly important issue and one that hasn't been addressed sufficiently. You've gone to Washington to try to work on it. You've proposed a lot of thoughtful proposals. We've fought hard for them. Why, however, though, is it so difficult in Washington, D.C. to do things that are such common sense to Americans in Iowa or Minnesota or Florida or elsewhere? Why can't something like fire employees at the VA happen?
Well, first of all, and when I talk about this, I always want to remind people, as I did in my speech, that there are really good people that work at the VA. If you interact with the VA, you know this firsthand. Yes. The vast majority of them are really good people, and they work hard. Many stay after hours. They're veterans themselves. But there are people that are not doing a good job, and they should be held accountable. So what is the impediment to that? Well, I think there's a broader lesson here. And that is that any government agency creates a life of its own constituency that supports it. So part of it is the resistance you get from that, whether it's those who seek to put the interest of federal employees before the interest of veterans, whether it's those that simply don't want to disrupt an existing system because they're comfortable with it and the way that it works. These are the sorts of things that we run into, and it's not just with the VA, it's in government in general. But in the VA, it's a pressing issue. I can tell you that in Florida, obviously, we have a large number of veterans in our state. A significant number of the constituent calls we get are not dissimilar from what my brother is going through now. And it frustrates us to understand that there are ways to change and improve the system, to create accountability, but the impediment to it, quite frankly, is a commitment to the status quo that in many ways works its way into both political parties, but especially in the political left, that seems to put the interest of bureaucrats ahead of the interest of the veterans they're there to serve.
Absolutely. And we've seen that powerfully with examples of, unfortunately, and again, I say the same thing, so many great employees at the VA, but one recently caught selling heroin off the job or having relations at work, none of which are fired, and of course just sort of passed along or with a pat on the back, or pat on the head. The other thing you mentioned in your speech is choice. And there's been a lot of discussion about a choice card. Who in here has a choice card from the VA? Who's been able to use that choice card? Okay, that's what we get almost every single time. But if you have a choice card but you don't have choice, you don't really have choice. Right? It's just a piece of paper. How you talked about it a little bit in your speech, but why is a choice card the answer, or how do you get to something more in depth?
Actually, embedded in your question is this reality. You can pass any law you want. Most of these laws are dependent on how they're implemented. And one of the truths about federal bureaucracies is, and again, I don't mean to paint everyone with the same brush, because there's people at the VA that support choice. And there are people at the VA that are frustrated they can't provide these services. And we want to ensure that we are grateful to them for the work that they're doing. But part of the challenges we have is, many of them that are in charge of these programs, their argument is, we've seen politicians come and go. We've been here longer than you, and we'll be here long after you're gone. And you can pass whatever law you want, but we get to implement it. And we're going to implement it in the way we want to implement it, which often means they're going to drag it out, they're going to slow it down, or they're going to actually make it not work. And so it goes back to the accountability law we passed. You can pass the law, but you have to have the right people implementing it. Otherwise, the law loses its meaning. And so what's required here, and I said it during my speech, is you need a commander-in-chief that makes this a priority, that appoints a VA secretary and is on them about why is it that when I go out across the country, people still aren't seeing choice. We told you we wanted to achieve this, and if it doesn't happen, we will replace you. And I'll keep hiring VA secretaries until we find someone that knows how to implement the intent of that law and ultimately the purpose that we're trying to serve. So it ultimately comes down to that executive leadership to ensure that the mission statement is being accomplished, because today it isn't.
Absolutely, and unfortunately we had high hope for Secretary McDonald, but it seems quickly, the Secretary of the VA, he's been quickly captured by the bureaucracy. If you were to hear opponents talk about what you talked about today, in fact, we saw a press release go out even before you spoke, accusing you of privatization. They say, Senator Rubio, you don't want to fix the VA. You just want to privatize it. You want to shut it down. You want to push vets out into the private market. We get accused of the same thing. If you can, to this audience, because there's nowhere in our report or in what you talked about that said we're privatizing it, why do they do that, A? And B, what is your answer to that critique which they're trying to spin?
Well, they do it because they want to confuse people and scare people. And if that's their argument, then I guess the GI Bill should be also changed. And we should build a bunch of military universities run by the VA, or by the Veterans Administration. And you won't be able to take your GI Bill benefits to the local community college or university or any school you want to take them to. The GI Bill, a very successful program, allows veterans to take that benefit to any college or university in America that's accredited that will accept it as payment. And almost all of them, and not all of them, do. So what we're trying to do is the same choice here. You can continue to go to the VA. If you're happy with your local VA, my guess is you're going to continue to go there, because they provide excellent care. In the good VAs and in the good systems, you are being cared for by people that understand the needs of veterans. But what if you find yourself in the situation that my brother finds himself in, or other people find themselves in, where you can't? The VA either doesn't have the provider, or the wait is so long it makes no sense. And it could be a public hospital, a private hospital, a clinic, somewhere nearby that can see you sooner and provide the service that you need. Why should you not be able to take that benefit? Who does the benefit belong to? Does the benefit belong to the government, or does the benefit belong to the veteran? And if the answer is the benefit belong to the veteran, then the veteran should be able to take the benefit anywhere they want and anywhere they can receive the care timely and effectively.
Absolutely. And you talked about it. We were very disappointed. You can clap for that. We were disappointed when Secretary Clinton laid out her plan, because we thought, VA plan, we thought, hey, with such a big scandal, it's got to be universal that there's a new way to do this. And unfortunately, so many, to include also Bernie Sanders, are doubling down on the bureaucracy as is, and in some ways downplaying the actual scandal. And as a group that goes across the country, every single audience we speak to, it's a palatable sense that this bureaucracy is fundamentally broken. Do you have a sense of the type of person you would want to put at the top of the VA?
I think someone that's result-oriented, an individual strong enough to, look, it's not to stand up to an entrenched bureaucracy. If you think about how hard it is to turn around any agency of government, especially one as large and as entrenched as the Veteran Administration, But in fact, you could apply that to the Department of Defense. You can apply that to the State Department. You need an individual that has the strong force of personality that is able to deal with that entrenched, the deep roots that go into those places. So you need someone that isn't going to be captured by it. You have a lot of smart people, well-intentioned, but they do not have the leadership skills necessary to tackle in a stagnant status quo that will not change on its own and that will fight you every step of the way. So it has to be an individual, someone that hopefully has a record of proven results at turning around organizations that have been stagnant and stale, but more importantly, someone that has the force of personality and the vision and the leadership to be able to tackle an entrenched bureaucracy and instead of becoming captive to it, have the ability to make it bend to the will of the laws passed by Congress and the policies set forth by the President.
Absolutely. Shifting gears a little bit to defense, I woke up this morning, saw Good Morning America, saw that you were in Michigan doing a radio interview. I thought, do I have the right day for the event here in Iowa? Yeah. But they have fast planes these days.
It's not that far away.
It's not that far away either. Fair enough. Fair enough. A lot of things have happened since the last time we spoke as well, and you talked about it this morning on Good Morning America. The world has changed in unfortunate ways, from Paris to San Bernardino and elsewhere. I know I can speak for my family, and I think for a lot of you, there is a sense that it's off the rails, that that there's a threat here at home and around the world that's only growing, and America is lost in that sense. Specifically talking about ISIS, what would you do both abroad but also at home to address this clearly growing threat?
Well, let's understand what ISIS is. ISIS is an apocalyptic version of Islam. And that's important to understand. ISIS has this monthly online publication. It's called Dominick, spelled D-I-B-I-Q. Look it up, but not too often, because then people will wonder about you. But Dominick is an online publication. And the reason why it's named Dominick is because Dominick is a small village in northern Syria, where according to ISIS's interpretation of prophecy, that is going to be the site of Armageddon. That's going to be the site of this final showdown between the forces of Islam and the forces of the West. And this is not some hidden provision in their ideology. It is what they lead with. It's how they recruit people. When they recruit someone to join ISIS, what they say is, you are going to be part of this great army that's going to trigger. It's going to lure the West into this final showdown, and we're going to win. And when we win, the whole world will become like us, and the ones who refuse to will die. Okay? And that's what they're using as a recruiting tool. Why is it important for us to understand it? Because once you understand that this is what they're motivated by, triggering the apocalypse, whether you believe they're capable of doing it or not, once you understand that that is what they are motivated by, you understand that they cannot be contained, that they will never be satisfied with controlling land in Iraq or in Syria. They seek to expand and grow until they dominate the world. And in particular, they are looking for anything that could lure us into this confrontation. And that's concerning, because what does that mean? That means being able to one day detonate a nuclear device or a dirty bomb or an electromagnetic attack or a chemical or biological attack. Anything spectacular that they believe will provoke this final showdown. That's the first area of concern. Then they're growing in their capabilities. For example, ISIS has very detailed and sophisticated knowledge of the U.S. immigration system. So yes, they're trying to infiltrate by using Syrian refugees into Europe and into Canada and into North America and the United States, but they also have a pretty good understanding of our visa programs. It's how potentially they were able to utilize a provision most Americans aren't even aware of, a fiancé visa. It's why they actively recruit people that fit a certain profile, like doctors or university students. It's why they're looking to, by the way, recruit people that have visa waiver privileges because they are citizens or nationals of European countries, one of the 38 countries around the world, for example, that have visa right access to the United States. And so in the homeland, we are aware that this threat exists, and so we must re-examine all of our immigration policies to ensure that we are reacting to their growing capability and their sophistication. The other is their efforts at radicalization here in the home front. The ability to radicalize an American citizen. In the case of San Bernardino, one of the two attackers, born and raised in this country, understood all the greatness of this country and yet rejected it in favor of radical Islam. And this poses a real threat. There has to be counter-messaging. And in particular, I think we do need to work with Muslim communities around this country to counter-message that. We need their cooperation. If in fact those who are truly and strongly committed to rooting out radicalism, we'll need their cooperation in identifying these people and identifying mosques that are being used as centers of radicalization and so forth. But beyond that, we also need the intelligence tools to be able to gather this information. And increasingly, these terrorists are communicated using encrypted, sophisticated software and encrypted devices that not even law enforcement can break into. They've moved into dark spaces in the internet to communicate and to radicalize. So we must improve and update and modernize our intelligence gathering capabilities, not weaken them, which was what's happened here over the last few years, including with the cooperation of Republicans. And the third is we need to confront them. We need to take away their safe havens. Because ultimately, in order to be a global movement, like they're trying to become, you need a place to work from. And they've created those spaces in Iraq and in Syria, but increasingly in Libya, increasingly in Afghanistan. They're now conducting attacks in Yemen, in Saudi Arabia. They aspire to conduct massive attacks in Jordan, a country that really is in their crosshairs. And so we need to deny them these safe havens, and it must be done militarily. Air power alone will not defeat them. You cannot defeat them simply with air power. We need increased airstrikes, but that alone will not defeat them. They must be defeated on the ground by a ground force. And the best way to do that is with a ground force that is made up primarily of Sunni Arabs themselves. We will continue to arm and support the Kurds because they will hold the Kurdish territories. We should empower Christians to be able to defend their families and their cities. But it is the Sunni Arabs that must ultimately drive them out of the Sunni areas. And that will require us not just to cooperate more closely with Iraqi and Syrian Sunnis. It will also require us to cooperate. It will also require Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Jordan and the Gulf kingdoms like the UAE to do more. They have a deep vested interest in this. We need to use the leadership of the president to drive them into that coalition that they provide ground forces. And we'll embed special operators to help with the airstrikes, to help with training, to help with special missions. But the bulk of that ground force has to be Sunni Arabs, because only Sunni Arabs can take a Sunni Arab city or village and then hold it without sectarian violence. The broader narrative here, by the way, you wonder why the Iran deal is related to this, and I know this is a long answer, but it's a complicated issue. Why the Iran deal matters here? Because the Middle East in particular is divided between a conflict between Shia and Sunni. And our Sunni allies in the region see this deal with Iran as a betrayal of them, that we've chosen Iran and we've put Iran in the power broker position. And so that is why this is important for us to be firm in our commitment to work with our Sunni Arab allies in the region. That's why the existence of Assad is such an irritant to this entire process. As long as he remains in power, these Sunnis that we're going to need in order to defeat this radical Sunni movement are going to be reluctant to be a part of any coalition that is part of its goals is not the removal of Assad and the replacement of Assad by someone who will not govern that country in a way that makes it a puppet of Iran, of Syria, that will not make it a puppet of Iran. And so these are the sorts of things we need to put together, and we need to do quickly. Otherwise, ISIS will continue to grow its territorial hold, will continue to have a platform from which to radicalize people around the world, and will continue to gobble up territory. They lose one city here, they gain one somewhere else. They now have 13 or 14 separate and distinct affiliates, not just in the Middle East, in Africa, in the Caucasus Mountains, in the Caucasus region, all over the world. Increasingly now they're looking into Asia. So this is a significant risk. It can be defeated. ISIS can be defeated, but it must be defeated both ideologically and militarily. And it must involve a comprehensive global strategy to confront them. And only the United States can put that sort of coalition together. It is not happening now.
Amen.
Was that longer than 90 seconds? Because that's all we have at the debate. So.
You did answer 4 of my questions on the cards in one. So I will say we've got so many questions that what I'm trying to do is integrate the questions into what I'm asking the senator, as well as calling out a few specifically through the process to try to get through all of them. Adam Hansen has first, before I get to his question, you mentioned Iran. And Governor Christie took a stance a couple of days ago saying, hey, I believe Iran is the single greatest threat we face, not ISIS, even though ISIS is a big threat. You don't have to necessarily say which one is a bigger threat, because I know they're both big. But what do we do now about Iran's continued pursuit of a nuclear weapon?
Well, let me first say on that, Iran is a very significant threat. And the problem we have now in the world is it's more like college football. It's not, who cares who's 1 or 4? They're all in the playoffs, right? The top 4 teams. We've got at least 4 major threats. Obviously, China and its military expansion is one of the largest military buildup in the history of the world is occurring right now in the Asia-Pacific region. Russia is increasingly aggressive in both Europe and now increasingly in the Middle East, and have caused great complications there. North Korea is governed by a lunatic who possesses dozens of nuclear weapons and increasingly the ability to deliver them to the west coast of the United States. He already has Guam and Hawaii within its range. And Guam and Hawaii within his range, and then you've got Iran. And the threat because Iran is governed by a radical Shia cleric with an equally apocalyptic vision of the future. He too believes that the role he has is to lead modern-day Islam into a final confrontation with the West, except it'll be a Shia-governed world, not a Sunni-governed world. And so when someone with that apocalyptic vision of the future is going to receive $150 billion of sanctions relief and is going to use it to do what they've always done with their money, sponsor terrorism, build a long-range missile, which they continue to develop and one day hold American hostage with, and ultimately buy from the North Koreans or build a nuclear warhead, that is an unacceptable risk. So one of the things I've said is that on my first day in office, I will cancel the president's deal with Iran, which is nothing but a political arrangement. It is not a treaty. It is not binding. I will give the economies around the world a choice and private sector around the world a choice. They can either do business in America or they can do business in Iran, but they can't do both. I think they're going to choose America, virtually every single one of them, since we represent about 40% of global capital flows, and Iran represents less than 1% of global capital flows. So I don't think it's much of a competition. And we will also back that up with a credible threat of military force, not as our first choice, but as a real credible threat. The choice to Iran that you will never have a nuclear weapons program. If you attempt to build it, we will destroy it militarily. And this is important because it is the only thing Iran has ever responded to in the past. In 2003, Iran suspended its nuclear weapons program after the U.S. invaded Iraq. It shows that they respond to the credible threat of military force, especially if they believe that that threat could undermine the regime. And I don't think Iran has ever been concerned that Barack Obama would ever back up any of our policies by striking their program. Now look, this is not my preferred outcome. My preferred outcome is that somehow the political winds shift in Iran and more reasonable people take hold and they move in a different direction. That is my preferred outcome. If there is a possibility to achieve it, I will pursue it with all my heart. But I can tell you that if the choice comes down to military action or having to live with a nuclear Iran, I will choose military action every single time.
It's a heavy choice, for sure. I've got a question from Adam Hansen that has been triggered by the recent conversation around San Bernardino and intelligence gathering. You referred to it briefly. He asks, how do we protect against domestic terror and threats while still protecting our individual rights? The idea that, hey, there's a sense that there's over-surveillance or there's a lot of opportunity for government to look into our lives. How do you maintain security and balance liberty?
Well, first of all, I would start by reminding everybody here that your local retailers have a lot more information about you than the government does. They know what magazine subscriptions you have. They know what you like to buy if you use your debit card at the grocery store. They have a consumer profile on virtually every American consumer. They know far more about your lives than government does or even tries to know. Number two, if someone in the federal government is caught abusing our intelligence programs, if you catch someone in the federal government misusing intelligence information, they should be fired and they should be prosecuted. But here's what I'm also telling you. These terrorists are growing increasingly sophisticated in the way they communicate with one another, in the plots they put together. In fact, in some cases, these plots involve a network of two people who happen to be married to each other, so they may or may not be communicating with an extensive network. We need to be able to find this out before they're able to conduct attacks. This is a matter of life or death. We are at war, and it's an unusual war. It's not with a nation state. It's not with a people that wear uniforms in the battlefield. But we are at war, and if you don't believe that, then obviously we have more work to do to convince you that we are at war with radical Islamic terrorists. And it's not just ISIS. It's also Al-Qaeda. There are other groups that aspire to attack us in the homeland. And when you are at war, it requires extraordinary measures, and in this case, the ability to identify plots and disrupt them before they are capable of carrying out attacks in the homeland or in our interests around the world that kill Americans and attack our interests. And this is a real and present threat. Every single FBI office in America has at least one open ISIS investigation. Every single field office in America. And those are the ones we know about. We suspect that the majority of people in the country that are radicalized and are sympathize with ISIS's cause, we may not even know about. So it is a real threat. It is important for us to address it for what it is, and it will require us to be able to expand our ability to collect intelligence and disrupt these plots. And as far as civil liberties are concerned, absolutely. We should never have a state where people are being surveilled for purposes of abusing that power. And if you catch someone do it, you should prosecute them. And you should put them in jail for a long time for having violated these laws. But if we don't have these tools at our disposal, you are going to see more and more terrorism increase in the United States because these terrorists have long ago exceeded our existing authorities and capacities in terms of how they communicate.
Speaking of that threat, it certainly hits home for a lot of us. I know that the 10th Somali refugee in Minneapolis was arrested just yesterday for supporting ISIS. This is the type of thing that's right in our backyard. You mentioned folks who won't admit that we're at war. I'll ask you a question about President Obama. Where's Aaron Regan? Aaron? Aaron had a question. I'm going to read it off. She said, President Obama has spent a lot of his time in Paris lately with other world leaders focused on climate. And he keeps mentioning taxing emissions as a solution to these problems without saying how it would affect the average person. What do you think about that? How do you think we can tax our way to lower emissions?
No, not only that, I think it would be devastating to our economy. And we are all interested in the protection of our environment. No one wants to breathe air that is poisoned or drink water that's unclean or live in a world where, I mean, look what's happening in China now. You couldn't even see the buildings through the smog of 48 hours ago, and that's a regular occurrence. And I would argue America is significantly cleaner today than it was 20 years ago. And it's been driven largely by the American innovator that has figured out ways to not just make us cleaner, but also make us more energy and efficient. And the American innovator will continue to move us in that direction. But what we cannot do is unilaterally harm our economy to make a symbolic point. The fact of the matter is the largest emitters in the world, and will be for the foreseeable future at a growing rate, are developing countries, especially China and India, that have no interest in unilaterally harming their economy until they reach parity with us, as they've made very clear. It is already difficult enough to create jobs in this country. It is already difficult enough to start a business or expand an existing one in the United States. We can't do anything that makes it even harder. And many of the proposals the president has on these issues will make America less competitive economically. So my argument remains, let's make America more competitive economically, and let's have confidence in the ability of the American innovator to drive us to more energy efficiency and to cleaner sources of fuel in a way that doesn't harm our economy and, in fact, could create jobs in the process.
Absolutely. Blake, I'm going to butcher this, Magahi? Blake, hey, thanks for this question. As a military family member, he asks, I've watched my uncle navigate the complicated red tape, ridiculous VA system to get the mental health services he needs due to his experiences serving in the military. And I feel veterans' voices like his are drowned out by big donors and special interests. How will you make sure veterans' voices, heroes' voices are heard over super PACs, special interests, and party spending?
Well, first of all, by continuing to do what I've done here today, but not just here today, but in my time in the U.S. Senate. We were responding to the voices of people calling my office. In my case, it wasn't just constituents, it was a member of our family who was dealing with many of the same issues that you've outlined in terms of navigating the red tape and the complicated bureaucracy. And I think it's important to elect people to office that have a proven record of caring about these issues, both in what they've done in their time in office, if they've served in office, but also in what they make a priority. And I believe this is our second or third event that we do together with Concerned Veterans for America. It's an issue that has importance to us because I honestly think it's a critical, not just moral obligation of this country to take care of those that have taken care of us, but I believe it is a critical component of our national security. As we move forward from a practical perspective, if we create a reputation in this country as a nation that does not take care of its veterans, you will find it harder and harder to recruit people to join the armed forces of the United States. And you will find it harder and harder to keep people in the armed forces of the United States when they're worried about their well-being of their families back home. And this is a significant threat moving forward for us as well. And so I hope that all of the candidates will make this a priority, but I can tell you that I will continue in this campaign to talk about this issue, and in the time I have left in the U.S. Senate, continue to work hard to pass that second bill, which gives the VA secretary the power to fire anyone, not just executives, but anyone at the VA who isn't doing a good job.
By the way, to that, amen. Short, shameless plug, if you get involved with Concerned Vets for America, you will be a part of fighting to get that bill through the United States Senate right now. When it passed the House with bipartisan support, two things happened. The White House issued a veto threat. The first time in 25 years the White House has issued a veto threat on a VA bill was Senator Rubio's VA Accountability Act, because they're more in bed with the AFGE, the government unions, than they are concerned about the actual bill. The second thing that happened is Senator Rubio immediately took that House bill and took it to the Senate floor. I believe it's unanimous consent. Is that what it is? To bring it to a vote for unanimous consent. And Blumenthal, what's his first name? I don't even remember. Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut, who's on the VA committee, came down to block it. The forces there are powerful to block it, but I'll tell you, we're gathering co-sponsors. His Senate office is actively involved in it. We're going to fight to get the VA Accountability Act passed in the United States Senate, and then dare the President of the United States to veto a bill that would finally help fix the Department of Veterans Affairs. So there's a lot of work left to be done, but and we're fighting it. You mentioned the military. Obviously, a lot of anxiety also exists with the fact that our military has been undercut. Policies like defense sequestration that have gutted it, political correctness and its pervasiveness in many ways of how things have been handled. How would you approach ensuring and you mentioned it, but specifically not just through military spending, but also reforming certain ways that the VA does, or the Department of Defense does business?
Yeah. Well, first of all, people immediately say, well, we got to bring the debt under control, and that means across-the-board cuts. And that's, in my mind, the wrong way to look at it. But I believe the fundamental obligation of the federal government, in fact, one of the primary reasons why we have a federal government, is to provide for national defense. And I believe that the first thing we should pay for and fully fund is our national defense needs. And then, with the money that's left over, do all the other things that are necessary for our country. The second point I would make is that our national debt is not being driven by defense spending. Our national debt, as a percentage of the size of our economy, is being driven by the future structure of Social Security and Medicare. Important programs that I support. I'm from Florida. There are a lot of people on Social Security and Medicare in Florida. My mother happens to be one of them. And I don't want to see any changes to Social Security and Medicare that are bad for her or for people like her. And the good news is that doesn't have to happen. We can keep Social Security and Medicare the same way for her and for people that are about to retire and people that are already retired. But it's going to have to look different for me. I'm 44 years old. I feel 45, but I'm 44. And my Social Security and Medicare and my children's is going to look different, one way or the other. It either is going to be bankrupt and not exist, or we will have reformed it. And by reform, what I mean is instead of retiring at 67, I'd have to retire at 68, which if I was still in the Senate would make me one of its youngest members. Social Security benefits, if I've been financially successful, my benefits might not grow as fast as someone who made less money. Medicare could be a lot like what Medicare Advantage looks like now, the ability to take your Medicare money and buy into a private plan that provides more and that you like better. These are not unreasonable changes to ask of someone who's 20 years away from retirement in exchange for balancing our budgets, bringing our debt under control, and leaving the system undisrupted for either people that are about to retire or are about to retire. When it comes to the defense budget, there is waste at the Pentagon. For example, our civilian workforce has grown too large. Our procurement process, particularly on things like computers. F-35. Well, on computers, the F-35 is a good plane. On computers, we spend way too much money compared to what the private sector would pay for things like that. And I'm just giving one example. I'm not saying that's the central issue here. But I am telling you this. And by the way, there is an issue in contracting. Okay? We don't have enough competition in defense contracting. On some of these major projects, there's one or two big bidders, sometimes only one. And anyone who's in business knows that if all you have is one or two people bidding on the project, then the project's not going to be successful. You're not going to get a good price for it. You also sometimes have the Defense Department adding to the cost. They put out a project and they come back and issue all these changes to it that further inflate the costs associated with the program. But here's what I am telling you. There is not $1 trillion of waste at the Pentagon. And the implications of this $1 trillion cut in defense spending over the next decade will be this. We will be left with the smallest and the oldest Air Force we have ever had. We will be left with the smallest and the oldest Navy we have had since the end of the First World War. And we will have an Army that is already too small, being reduced by an additional 40,000 positions over the next 2 years. And we spent a significant amount of time here today discussing the threats around the world. And it makes absolutely no sense to me how in a world that is growing more dangerous, we are growing less capable militarily. And so these are issues that need to be addressed by the next commander-in-chief. And one more thing that should disturb you. We are not investing enough in research and development, which means that 10 years from now, when the commander-in-chief is presented with a crisis and presented with options, the options that will be before him or her are being determined right now by what we are investing in researching and in developing. Do we have answers to the asymmetrical warfare that the Chinese are going to conduct in the Asia-Pacific region? Do we have a way to protect our satellites in space, even though China's practicing how to blow them up? Do we have answers to the cyber warfare that Russia has shown capable of? Do we have answers to their expanded military capacity? Do we have answers to the growth in the Chinese submarine fleet? We have to have answers to all of those threats, plus the new ones that we've talked about here today involving non-traditional threats such as radical Islamists. So these are very significant things that we need to be investing time and resources in having answers for.
I had a couple questions in here about the morale of the military. You talk about capabilities, but one of the most important capabilities to point to your brother are those men and women who put on the uniform and have those boots on the ground. What would you do? What would be the biggest thing you would do as commander-in-chief or in any position of leadership to restore morale in our military?
I mean, one of the things that you talk to men and women and serve in uniform, and you hear this all the time, people want to understand that the sacrifices they're making are for a noble and important purpose. They want to understand that we're being called to do. When people enlist in the military, they recognize what a sacrifice that could pose, not just to their life, but to their families back home, and ultimately to their future. If they suffer traumatic brain injury, if they suffer a debilitating injury, or even work-related injuries that manifest over time, people understand that, and they're willing to make those sacrifices, but they need a commander-in-chief that constantly is reminding us that our cause is a noble one, that what we are engaged in is not just an annoyance that some other president left us with, and now we're going to figure out how to get out of it as quickly as possible, but that, in fact, the mission you have been called to do is important. It is a noble cause. It is as noble as any cause this nation has ever undertaken. And in the case of the threats we face today, it is a great noble cause. We are trying to defeat an evil ideology, radical, apocalyptic Islam, that seeks to enslave and kill those who do not agree with him. It seeks to enslave and kill Sunnis that do not agree with him. It seeks to enslave and kill all Shia. It seeks to enslave and kill Buddhists. And it seeks to enslave and kill Hindus and Christians and Jews. In essence, everyone who does not share their view of the world, they believe they are called to kill. This is the ideology that we're now confronting, and they must be defeated. And it is a greater cause as this nation has ever undertaken, not just for the peace of the world, but for the future of our children and our country. And it is important to have a commander-in-chief that is constantly reminding our military of the noble cause in which we've engaged them in. It is important for the morale. The second, and is one I mentioned in my speech, is they need to understand they are called and are being given the resources and a plan to win. You clearly define what victory looks like, and you give them the resources necessary to succeed. And that's something that's been missing, and the engagements, especially the ones we haven't been successful in throughout our history, have been ones in which victory was not clearly defined, and in which the resources were not provided, or the rules of engagement were not provided for success. It is incredibly frustrating to our men and women in uniform to be given rules of engagement that don't just simply put them in danger, but seem to stand in sharp contradiction with what they've been told their purpose is in the battlefield. And so these are all important to the morale of our country, to ensure that we prioritize their service by investing in our military, by ensuring that they have the resources and the training and the intelligence information necessary to succeed, by having a clear mission and purpose of victory, by having that mission defined, and ultimately by having a commander-in-chief that is constantly reminding them and the nation that what we are engaged in is not adventurism. What we are engaged in is a noble cause, and that is freedom, liberty, and peace for all the world. And America, as a global leader, is playing an important role in that cause.
I've got a question from Jim Knutson. Jim, where are you? There he is, right there. I'll add to his question. Part of his question is, where do you get your military advice? To that is, I will add, one of the candidates who will not be named now says from the Sunday shows. Obviously, you've got to be very intentional about where and when you get that military advice. Who do you seek on the tough calls military advice from?
One of the advantages I believe we've had is as a member of the Senate Select Intelligence Committee, I don't just have access to the most classified and sensitive information before the federal government, but also the individuals responsible for turning in that information into action. And so we're constantly interacting with members of the military, particularly those involved in special operations and those involved in gathering and implementing intelligence. And it is from that interaction that a lot of what we are talking about here today is driven by the people that today are engaged in this conflict and are engaged in these conflicts around the world. And I understand that not every candidate running for president has access to that. I'm not sure the Sunday shows are the right way to get your news either, but I understand that not every candidate running for president has access to that, but we do. And it's informed not just how I feel about the issues I've discussed with you today, it's why I'm so passionate about the intelligence programs. I live in a community of people, for example, who, over 1 million Cuban exiles, who I've grown up around my whole life, people who lost their country to a government that was repressive. So I'm incredibly sensitive to the idea that government would be intrusive. But I also see on a daily basis the risks before this country. I also see on a daily basis the plots that this country has been able to disrupt, and I worry about the ones we don't know about. I see on a regular basis what other countries are doing to take advantage of us. I see on a regular basis how the Chinese have rapidly expanded their capabilities especially their asymmetrical capabilities, their ability to destroy a $4 billion aircraft carrier with a $4 million shore-to-ship missile, how they've invested in space technologies to blind our satellites and take away our technological high ground. I see how the Russians constantly manipulate and cheat in every arms deal they've signed with the United States to spy on us and to gain a strategic advantage in key parts of the world. And provided with this information, it gives me a sense not of alarm, but of urgency about the need to provide for our collective defense. And it leaves me puzzled, because I know that there are leaders on the other side of the aisle, and in particular the president, that has access to all the same information and yet continues to say the things that he is saying. And so it is from those interactions that I have now on a regular basis as a member of the Intelligence Committee that I derive not just my views on these issues, but the sense of urgency that I have about them.
Absolutely. Well, I want to, before I ask the last question from a veteran from our organization, I want to first thank you for being here, for spending time with us this morning with this entire group. If you have a question that did not get answered, you submit it on a card. We'll get back to you, or Senator Rubio's office will get back to you. I'll also be sticking around, so feel free to come on up and ask those questions. We want to get them answered, but this man's a busy man, so we appreciate him being here. And I also want to thank his Senate staff in particular, who really do a great job staying in touch, staying engaged on these big issues, as well as Ovik, who I recognized earlier for the great work he does on healthcare and the VA. Truly has been an amazing opportunity fighting for veterans on real solutions to deliver 21st century healthcare that veterans have earned and deserve. So thank you again for taking the time. The last question that I have is the one that we asked often, which is, this is a room full of veterans and military families. And patriotic Americans, but a lot of vets and a lot of people who put a lot on the line in this country. Why should these veterans, these military families and others, make you, specifically Marco Rubio, their next commander-in-chief?
Well, thank you for that question.
We ask it of everybody. We ask it of every single one.
Well, first of all, it begins with the notion that the next president of the United States must understand, as I said in my speech earlier, that the most important obligation any president has is the role of commander-in-chief. It's interesting, this country, unlike most countries in the world, have put a civilian in charge of the security of our country as commander-in-chief. And it is beyond, the economy is not run by the government, it's run by the private sector. All we need are policies that allow the economy to be competitive. But only a president can be commander-in-chief. And the hardest decision any president will ever make is to engage our men and women in combat. It is, everyone running for president will tell you that. But if you sign the letters to those families who have lost loved ones, if you meet with them, if you interact with the veterans that we do that have lost limbs and sight because of their service to our country, you realize the implications. This is not something to be taken lightly. I've been very clear that we will never engage this country in hostilities unless our national security interests are clearly at stake. But it's important to understand we're the United States of America. Our national security interests are much broader than that of most countries in the world. We live in an increasingly global economy, where events halfway around the world have a direct impact on us, not just from a defense perspective, but from an economic one as well. And we remain the only country in the world capable of convening collective action to confront collective risks. So it must be in the clear national interest of the United States. Second, we must be ensured that we are involved, we give our men and women a clear path to victory, that we define what the objective is, that we define what victory is, and that we provide them the resources necessary to succeed. Too often in the history of this country, we have attempted or have done symbolic military actions to send a message, or we've become involved in hostilities without a clear outcome in mind, or we have not provided them the resources necessary to achieve victory. I will never engage us in hostilities unless we provide that. And third, once our men and women are done serving us, when they come home, we will take care of them. We will honor their service to our country by providing them the care that they need. We recognize that in the 21st century, people are surviving injuries people have never survived in the battlefield. And that places a special obligation on us to provide for those in the rest of their lives, to give them the opportunities to reintegrate into society. We understand that traumatic brain injury is something that impacts veterans all across this country. Perhaps injuries that you didn't know about at the time, but now as you've returned home, you've seen its symptoms manifest itself. We understand that mental health has always been a big part of serving our country because we put our men and women in very traumatic circumstances that the average person never confronts. And yet when they come home, they bring those hidden scars with them and they begin to manifest in their lives. Beyond just the healthcare challenges that our men and women face, they also face a challenging economy. Once they leave the service of our country, they find an economy that in many cases cannot absorb them into the workforce. It doesn't recognize the skills that they gained while in the military. They don't get college credit oftentimes for the things they learned while in service. As I've said many times before, if you've served 2 tours of duty in the Middle East, that should at least qualify you for 3 or 4 credit hours in Middle Eastern affairs. If you're qualified to haul explosives on a dirt road in Afghanistan, I believe you're qualified to haul eggs on the interstate highway system of the United States. So we will also make it a priority to quickly and rapidly integrate our men and women back into the workforce, whether it's in manufacturing, working as welders and plumbers, whether it's in fixing airplanes and cars, whether it's getting college credit so they can pursue a profession by getting college credits based on what they learned in active service military. It is a full-scale commitment, a commitment to be wise in our use of force, to have the resources to win any conflict we engage in, to have clear rules of engagement and a plan to achieve success, and then when you come home to take care of you and your family, when you come back after taking care of us. That is my commitment. I believe it is the most important thing a president will do. And with all due respect and all humility, I don't know of anyone else running for president that's articulated it with that level of detail or with that level of passion and with that record of backing it up in the things I've done in the 4.5 years that I've been able to serve as a United States Senator from Florida. So I do hope I can earn the vote of all of you or as many of you as possible. Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Marco Rubio.